We're going to be talking about copper.
Yeah,
because
copper.
it's that time of year.
Yeah, it is that time of year where farmers should be checking their copper status really. So particularly the case because over the winter months, that's when any stores of copper, which are really held in the liver, are drawn on. And so if farmers are wanting to know that they're set up well for this situation, then it's a good time to be talking to the local vet about checking liver copper stores, and that can be done through a couple of mechanisms, Rob. So we can do so in a sample of live animals, and we do that by via a technique called liver biopsy, where under local anaesthesia we just pop a little trocar into the liver, take a sample of liver tissue and send that off to get copper levels analysed. And of course we can also share that sample and get other trace elements analysed as well, selenium and the likes.
How many in a flock would you do, for example?
Depends on the size of the flock, and also more than that, it depends on the susceptibility of the animals that you're looking at. And so it's quite a technical question, and in actual fact it needs to be dealt with on an individual basis. So that's exactly the sort of thing that your veterinarian would be able to advise you on as far as sample size. And sometimes actually it's we're getting into the high powers of statistics, and so sometimes as a veterinarian I might even consult with my local laboratory and get some advice on them as to sample sizes. The other way of checking liver copper levels is also through the dead animal. So if there's a line of animals going to slaughter, then that's also an appropriate time to work with the mechanisms in place through the slaughterhouses to take liver samples and get them analysed also.
That's assuming obviously that you're looking at a property, you're not just looking at a few sheep.
That's exactly right. So I guess leading on from that, that's sort of painted the picture as to why it's an appropriate time to talk about copper in particular. But maybe leading on from that, we end up asking the question, well, how does it happen? Well, why do we end up with deficiencies in copper? And interestingly enough, it's not typically just the standard copper levels that are deficient. It seems to go down, often in the Canterbury area anyway, right down to soil science, and often it's an interaction between in particular iron levels or molybdenum levels in the soil that create interactions with the copper, making it unavailable to be uptaken into the plant. And so although soil copper levels may be actually adequate, because we've got high levels of iron or molybdenum in particular, then sometimes that can affect the element being taken up into the plant and hence being available to the animal itself. So it's what we call an induced deficiency rather than a primary deficiency.
What are some of the problems with a deficiency?
Yeah, very good. So the biggie, trace element deficiency is really that age-old analogy of the iceberg. And although we can see obvious clinical signs of copper deficiency, and the things that I'll describe here are some old-fashioned diseases actually. So steely wool, so wool will lose its crimp with serious copper deficiencies. Black cattle that have brown coats, that's an obvious sign. Scraggy looking, spongy looking, diarrheic, sort of daggy looking cattle. And a classic is a disease called swayback that we often see in growing lambs and actually very commonly in growing weaner deer, where we get a neurological problem and the animals start looking drunk. They're a bit wobbly on the back pegs, and that's called swayback. That's a classic copper deficiency sign. In growing cattle, fractures of the long bones. If farmers are seeing lots and lots of fractures and they're thinking, well, this should be a one-off event that I see now and then just from an accident, if we're getting a number of fractures, humeral fractures or fractures of the femur in large animals, or growing animals, and that's also an indication of copper deficiency.
You'd automatically think of something like milk fever or something, wouldn't you?
Exactly, or you know, maybe if it's one animal, maybe it's just bad luck and he's fallen over or got caught in the fence, or you know, been in a fight with another bullock or something and ended up with a trauma. But when it's happening quite often,
Yeah,
then
so
you
it's
know,
not
need to
necessarily
look at.
calcium.
Exactly, and you know, I think these are the obvious signs, but the scary thing about trace element deficiency is the subclinical effects. So when we get deficiencies, before they get to that level where we're seeing overt or obvious clinical signs, how much production is being wasted, how much suboptimal performance of these animals is happening with these animals, how much better could we be doing them. And so that's the hidden effects of, or the subclinical effects we call them, of trace element deficiency. And actually sort of checking the status now is going to ensure that, you know, your production is not going to be limited in any way by copper deficiency. And it's the only way to do this is through monitoring. And
Very, very briefly, can you have poisoning? Can you have too much?
very, very, very important point to make. So copper is poisonous, and over supplementation is very dangerous. So supplementation and managing copper needs to be done in tight consultation with appropriate people. A veterinarian is obviously one that I'm going to push. But
So it's not a bad group of people to push,
yeah,
though, Nick.
yeah. So, but I mean, you know, if you've got good supplementation and then you think, oh, we'll just give a jab of a quick release product of copper on top of things, it's not always more is better, as unfortunately as a Kiwi item sometimes. So it can result in serious disease, poisoning and deaths. Yeah.
Nick, thank you very much indeed.